Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Bushwhacking History in Buffalo with Berserker Bear. If you can't tell, there's a little bit of a different format here. I'm pleased to introduce and present special guest that I have here, humbled and honored as well, Mason Winfield. So, local author here in Buffalo and the greater Buffalo area region, Western Door, if you will. People who are listening in and my viewers will be familiar with you. But if you want to introduce yourself real quick, because I use your book, obviously, I I hammer it. It's like a working syllabus, Mason, for places to go, and it's Shadows of the
Oh,
Western Door. So my viewers are familiar, but if you want to give yourself a brief introduction, and thank you for coming on my show. Again, I'm honored and humbled. So let people know a little bit of your background and your credentials, being an
yeah,
author,
yeah.
researcher as well, haunted ghost tour host as well.
Well, yeah, I have diverse endeavors, but yeah, Mason Winfield here. I call myself an author and a researcher. And when people ask me exactly what it is, I generally say something like supernatural historian or paranormal historian specializing in Western New York. But the supernatural paranormal is so full of these false titles. I hesitate to call myself a historian. My master's degree is in literature, so I'm sort of a folklorist. I collect supernatural folklore and paranormal report and folklore, and I specialize in Western New York. But and I'm the author of 16 books, and I've started writing more fiction now. Most of my earlier books were research surveys. Um, Sometimes it would be focused on like a city, like a book on Rochester with the History Press or Saratoga Springs.
Saratoga. My father was mentioning that they go there for the. My mother knows a good friend that lives in Saratoga.
Beautiful community. And the book, incidentally, on Supernatural Saratoga is doing very well. Um, and I also have founded a Ghost Walks company. It's called Haunted History Ghost Walks. We're the first supernatural tourism company in Western New York. And our focus is the history. We're basically walking storytellers. We're not ghost hunters. We're not talking to the dead. We're not psychics. We're not taking their picture. We're walking people through neighborhoods that have showing them sites and buildings that have interesting folklore. And while we're doing it, we're talking about history and architecture, really legitimate subjects. We're preservationists.
I love that. That's kind of a little bit of the different angle that I take from what I do. You get a well, you're doing your field work, doing the history of the nuances of the individual places and interesting sites and even bars in Buffalo. Going to like, I'm ashamed to say that I haven't been to one of your bar crawls, but when I'm
The haunted pub crawl.
I'll be there. Yeah, one of
They're
the
fun.
my buddies
We'll
I work with was
start them
there.
up this summer. We might be doing a few. I don't know. I've halfway thought about doing one around St. Patrick's Day, a Celtic haunted pub crawl.
Oh, nice. That would be awesome. Yeah. So like what I was getting at like is I it's what brought me into doing my presentation of history through the lens of Buffalo on my YouTube channel is how cool our architecture is, not just the rich history that we have from the Industrial Revolution onward with even infrastructure, Erie Canal, backfill to the 190. We have some of the coolest architecture. Our layout and the radial street pattern, the Baroque style street patterning, radials and the parkways. It's kind of the essence of what I wanted to show. And you do the other side of it, paranormal research. Now I have a connection with that because my wife and I love that watching a scary movie here and there for movie night. Also, just the rich spiritual history that is in this area and the greater Niagara region from Niagara Falls all the way down. I mean, if I'm there's a book I have actually that another one, the psychic. Are you familiar? The Psychic Highway: How the Erie Canal Changed America. It's all the Erie Canal is also known as the Psychic Highway. Now, through you and your work, I've known Western New York to be also called the Western Door, and then Franklin Lavoisier, the Dragon Path. Maybe
Yeah.
we can speak on that a little bit, or what your motivation was behind Shadows of the Western Door, and that'll bring us in. Well, you talked about the ghost tours, kind of going off the bullet points here, but I also featured on some of my posts here the most recent one, I believe, Prince of the Air. If you want to speak on that one.
Well, we can get to that. Let's get back to this business about the psychic highway.
Okay.
I remember reading one book, or not reading it, but being aware of one book where a guy believed that it was Route 90. Yeah. Now, who wrote that?
Michael T. Keene.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I know him. He's from Rochester.
Okay.
Nice guy. We get along great. Um, I don't think the Erie Canal may have had some effect on something. There was another guy who wrote a book on Route 90. He thought Route 90 was the spine of spiritualism and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just thinking to myself, a lot of this stuff was here before Route 90, you know. A lot of it was here before the Erie Canal. In case, you know, you have been paying attention to current events, there's something they call Route 5, which is a prehistoric footpath. It runs right along the 90, right along the Erie Canal. It's the same direction. It was there way before either one of them. I honestly got to hand it. I really think this footpath, Route 5, it's like Main Street, Williamsville, Main Street, whatever. It goes all the way across the state. It's got a line of supernatural folklore along it. Battles, ancient Native American sacred sites, Route 5. It was so proverbial among the early Europeans that it had nicknames among the Jesuits, like the Iron Trail. It was called the Iron Trail because so much military hardware clanked along it. Western New York, indeed, most of upstate New York, was so thick with old growth forests that other than water, other than the creeks and rivers, the only way to get anywhere was along these trails. Route 5 is so old, it was thought to date from the ice ages.
Ooh.
Yes, the glaciers didn't get down much past Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, and apparently this was a relatively ice-free zone. At least it would have been near the end of the ice ages. Any living being on foot or hoof that wanted to go east or west south of the Great Lakes would have been on Route 5. There are those who assert that Route 5 could have even been made by prehistoric animals on their migration trails. It is that old. This is the backbone of the psychic highway in my book.
Wow. That's fascinating. Now, when you say Route 5, I know that through going out to Hamburg, from getting on the 190 South right here.
Yeah.
You know, the old footprint of the Erie Canal.
I
Now,
would
is that
from Buffalo east, between Buffalo and Albany, I think. This incidentally is the spine of Iroquois, you know, Longhouse Nation's territory too. This goes right through all of their turf.
You mentioned that in your book, and I was getting into that when I was doing my dragon episode, and that's how I bumped up with your reference to Franklin Lavoie. Now, do you think that has a connection to the Saint Michael line running out of Europe?
No, I don't. Route 5 does not go the same. It's not the same alignment.
Okay, maybe not necessarily Route 5, so to speak, but the actual. Well, doesn't Franklin Lavoie reference that? And maybe just the actual dragon line itself on a different axis.
Franklin and I are on quite friendly terms, and I think he's a real treasure for Buffalo. I think every city ought to have a guy like him. The Dragon Path, the Michael Apollo axis, is a concept that I believe was pioneered by the British researcher John Michell. Now, John Michell is one of the founders and pioneers of the ley line system, or the concept of the ley lines in the British Isles. And standard thinking of a ley alignment is that it's a straight line connector between ancient sacred sites, or maybe we ought to put it, because they aren't all ancient, but places of ancient sanctity. Okay, places where ancient people would have worshipped, temples that they made, springs, fountains, ancient monuments, things like that. And John Michel and a few other people have carried the idea that maybe a ley line is not just 6 sites inside of 10 miles. Maybe there are global ones. Maybe there are world alignments. And that's where the Dragon Path comes from. There's no argument that for a reasonable length of distance in Europe, there really is some very interesting, important stuff that falls along the Michael-Apollo axis over there.
Indeed.
The irony is, though, that if you take the Michael-Apollo axis around the world, take it all the way around the globe, it lands through some other cool stuff. It points in the direction, if you take it all the way through the United States, you're hitting a lot of powerful sites here. There's a problem with that, though. See, the Earth, there's pro and con here. The Earth is not flat. Well, I don't think. And so there are people who object to the concept of a world ley would say, well, the Earth curves, it curves out of distortion in 10 miles. So you can't, but wait a minute. I can hold a tennis ball up in the air and I can draw a line around the thing. You just put the tennis ball on a spindle and spin it under a Sharpie, and all of a sudden you got this straight line. So it may curve it may curve in one plane, but it's a straight line. And so I don't have a problem with that. And I remember interviewing Franklin quite a bit back when I was writing Shadows of the Western Door, trying to get his insights and understanding on this. Exactly where does the Michael-Apollo axis go? And Franklin, as I recall, believes that it might be related to the path of the Milky Way.
Ooh,
And
okay.
yeah, and the Milky Way is a
Astrology.
sacred constellation to the Iroquoian people of upstate New York. So in other words, a lot of what Franklin says about this holds water. I'm not saying anything doesn't. I'm just saying that I don't go as far with some people. So I personally would be very cautious with the idea of the Michael-Apollo axis. I regard it as interesting. I regard it as unproven that there is a world ley that goes all the way across the world and cuts through Buffalo.
Interesting.
I think it's cool. And I wrote, yeah, it's wonderful. It probably goes right through Cahokia. I mean, if you could figure out its precise course and draw it. And my friend Franklin, he's trained with astronomy. He would probably be able to do that. And I haven't heard Franklin speak in a while. And I always enjoy listening to him speak too. And if you ever hear about him doing a talk anytime soon, let me know. We'll both go. But I think I'd be cautious with the Michael-Apollo line, the Dragon Path. It's a cool idea. I'm not positive it's proven.
That's extreme. Well, yeah, I did cite it a little bit in my Dragon video, and if nothing else, it is something interesting to look up. But as far as like the ley lines, I think it's indicative of, or at the very least, like we were saying earlier, if nothing else, the Western Door, Buffalo, I think has a very ancient essence to it. Now, there's a confluence of both land energy, maybe ley line, as well as the water. So that's another portion of the research that I do is Niagara River. And matter of fact, I got to get back to a facet of that aspect of my research is looking at the International Railway Bridge and the foundations and caissons, but that's for another day. But the energies and the earth energies that are here and the minerals in the water, we have some of the, there's some articles that I read from, almost probably from the early 1900s that say we have some of the richest or cleanest water because it's running, and it's very mineral rich because it's the runoff for pretty much the whole drainage of the Great Lakes. So the confluence of, earth energies, I guess, if you will, water and land. And then not to mention Buffalo being the cool spot where, because we have that long strip of the long way of the lake, we're the only northeastern industrial city that has a true sunset over water.
Some of the
And
most celebrated sunsets in the world
a lot
are
of
on.
people don't know that, and so
Oh.
it's kind of a little shot that we could take at other industrialized cities. But people think that Buffalo is kind of the back door, but it's like of New York City, Philly, Boston, um, Detroit,
Yeah. Maybe.
Chicago. None of them have a true, and it's a very narrow strip. If you look at the whole wide angle of it,
Oh yeah.
there's 200 miles of that lake here, and people don't realize they think we're talking about over the river, but no, it's actually a true sunset over water.
I used to hang out at the American Lakeshore around the Derby, Irving area when I was a high school kid, college kid. Used to hang out there all the time, friends down there. And those sunsets were just stunning. Now, let's get back to ley lines here, because I think, let me put it like this. My dear friend, Sig Lonergan, who's an author, he's a Vermonter who now he moved to Glastonbury, England, but he's an author and a researcher and a very large mind. And Sig has exposed himself to very diverse influences, ancient faiths and all that stuff. And Sig is a very spiritual guy, but he was giving a talk one time, and I was there, and one of the guys in the audience starts asking a question, talking about ley lines here, ley lines there, and Sig just slowed him right down, and he said, "Look, we got to agree on our definition for ley lines before we start." And that's exactly what I do. When I hear people talking about ley lines, I go, "Okay, what's your definition?" Now, if you're suggesting to me that a ley line, one of these imaginary straight line pathways across landscape, is an ancient pathway, most of the time I'm going to disagree with you, because there's a lot of lays in the world that do appear legitimate, but you couldn't walk them. They cross, or else they'd be a really stupid choice of walking path. So that's a definition of the ley line that I would reject. Another definition of them is that they're lines of force, that they're lines of Gaia energy, for instance, across landscape.
Earth energy.
Yeah, well, yeah. And it will manifest itself in human reactions. People will perceive it. There will be a preponderance of folklore there. There will be exceptional human experience. People will see more hauntings, or they'll experience more hauntings, or they'll think they do. But that force has never been proven in my experience. I don't know anybody who's gotten a device that could demonstrate a source of energy other than in perceived human experience. But the third definition of the ley line, the bottom line is that it is a straight line. It's basically an imaginary connector across landscape that connects places of sanctity to people. It connects natural sites of the sort where people used to worship, where people perceive supernatural experience, like springs and fountains. Or it may connect natural temples, churches, things like that people have consecrated through experience. And it may involve other sources of earthly energy, like fault lines and ancient monuments like earthworks, earth circles.
It reminds me of the Oracle at Delphi. I was doing a little bit of research on that recently, because that's got a natural fault line, and the Oracle there, they were thinking that there was some natural vapors coming out, like ethylene coming out, which was actually inducing the oracle there to go
Yeah,
into the trance of her.
yeah. Well, the Oracle of Delphi is a gas well.
Right, there you go.
Well, there's a
It
very
also had water. They also used a natural running stream that went through there as well. So there goes the confluence of different energies.
well, the Greeks were no dummies. I mean, they would have been, I mean, they may have been the inventors of, they may look like they were really left brainers developing the type of philosophy we associate with Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, but yet um, their mystics were just as powerful as any pre-industrial culture has ever had. And but let me tell you, while we're on the subject of a gas well and perceived human experience, there's a pretty powerful site in Western New York that was developed around a gas well. It's in Lackawanna.
I was gonna,
Father
I
Baker's Basilica.
Basilica.
Yeah, he believed he had found a gas well there.
That's
And he
another
told him,
trope of Buffalo that we were all told when we were young. If we were bad, we were going to get sent to Father Baker's. I I did a video on
well,
him,
he
and I remember learning that about that.
he was a wonderful man, but he didn't have time for BS. It's like
Yeah,
what his goal was producing successful adults out of people who didn't have a big chance. And
it was a big problem back then too. Orphans. I did a recent video on that. Kind of long and short of it, dregs of society. Um, Orphans were a big problem, and
oh,
for
it's tragic.
it is.
Do you know that in the um, Larkinville area used to have a lot of canals? They were spins of the Erie Canal.
Indeed, a lot. I
Cut a
have a
channel and fill it with water. And now, when it's 1840s and we don't have heavy machinery or anything, we don't have trucks and highways, you can move really heavy goods and get them really close to a big business. So many of the more important businesses in Buffalo were along these kind of lesser canals. And when they drained a bunch of those canals to start constructing, they didn't need them anymore after a while. There was one canal where they found hundreds of infant skulls.
I think I remember reading the article of that. Yes. Okay, so yeah, just talking about that unfortunate circumstance with finding the babies in the canals, the back canals, not necessarily the Erie Canal, but the ones that were the offshoot ones in Larkinville.
Right.
That's actually where my work was, near that area, near Silo City, Larkinville area, right outside the Erie Basin Marina. The place where my wife and I worked before we got sent home with the go home order a few years back was Seneca Street, and it's right down the road from Larkinville, historic area of Buffalo.
Well, actually, Seneca Street runs right through Larkinville.
There you go. Yep.
Route 16. Now, Seneca Street bends a lot. I mean, I think they call it that because it went through the Buffalo Creek Reservation. But Seneca Street, it bends a lot. Let's put it that way. At least now it does.
Yeah. So the backfilled canals, that was one of my, actually, that's one of the things that got me making YouTube episodes, actually, is realizing like, wow, they backfilled the Erie Canal into making the 190 section of the throughway. And that just goes to show that's the age of progress, filling in old infrastructure and stuff like that. Now that kind of leads us around to the interesting part, or the gravy part of what not that we weren't talking about anything interesting before, but kind of where I sink my teeth into and where the rubber meets the road with the Erie Canal, and that going all the way over to the Hudson, connecting New York City, and the commerce that happened after that made it much cheaper. The whole story of Erie Canal. I like to go back a little bit further, and with my work that I do, I take a different angle on certain anomalies or in history. One being the Vikings, and like I have that Viking history. my great grandfather being born in Oslo and having books that relate to this, older books, older academic books that detail Leif Erikson's adventure here, and from Helluland to Markland to Vinland. Now, a portion of my work, I have posited the notion that maybe New York State was Vinland, because we do have a lot of the the Finger Lakes is known as wine country. Also, the area where you first go into the Hudson has a lot of wine, is known for a lot of wineries. So that's one portion. And as we were talking about a little bit before I recorded, I suspect maybe that the Vikings were down through here. Maybe in the Viking Age, maybe there was a established trade. And I love to get your input on this, because it tracks back to you in your relationship with Barry Fell, and the fact that maybe there was civilization here way prior to the Columbian Exchange in 1492,
Well,
as we're told.
we've got a lot to unpack here. First of all, I wouldn't say that the Iroquoian cultures were not civilization. They were.
True, I
They
agree.
just weren't, and I know you didn't mean
In
that.
addition to, yeah,
Yeah. Um,
them as a civilized, right?
let's
Good
start
point.
with Barry Fell. He was the author of America, BC, and a couple of books. But Barry Fell was a very unique individual, neat guy. He was from New Zealand. He talked like Crocodile Dundee, really had a cool accent. And he was a Harvard professor in the 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever. And I was in graduate school. Towards the end of his term there, I was in graduate school in Boston. And Barry Fell had written books on mystery visitors to the continental United States from the ancient world before Columbus, pre-Columbian Europeans. And he was a professor of, he was an expert at two things that are really different from each other. One of them was epigraphy, rock carvings. And the other one, I forgot what it was, but it might have been botany or something. But Barry Fell was a polymath. That means somebody that's really good at a bunch of unrelated different things.
Oh, marine biologist, I believe he was right.
Okay, yeah, great.
That's
So
what he's
anyway,
credited for, I believe.
that makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
So I looked him up when I was up in Boston, and we met on a couple of occasions and chatted. And he thought I was a pretty good writer. I wasn't published then, but he was a really friendly guy. He wanted to see something I was working on, and great guy. But Barry Fell is sort of the pioneer, the respected pioneer of the idea of the ancient explorers in the Americas. And even though Barry's work was generally rejected by mainstream historians, his message was actually a lot more sensible than the way he was stereotyped. It's like, people who didn't like Barry Fell would go, he's wacky. He thought Phoenician chariots charging through Times Square. And, they just ridicule his positions. But if you really look at the way he went about things, he was making a lot of sense. And Barry admitted that a lot of his evidence might be rejected, but he wanted to get people thinking, and he wanted to get people seriously looking at the evidence there was instead of throwing it away, because they do that. So the long and the short of it is, to reply directly to your question about Vikings in the Great Lakes, I think it's a very good likelihood. There has been some evidence of it. There's an iron, maybe it's steel. There's a spearhead in the, I believe it's the Yates County Museum. No, wait. There's a county museum in Lyons, New York, whatever county that is. Wayne County, that's what it is. Pretty sure it's Wayne. Yeah, it's Wayne County. There's an artifact I wrote about a couple times. I call it the Soda Space spearhead. In like 1929.
It's in Shadows, I believe.
Yeah. Oh, is it? Oh, okay.
So. or one of the artifacts you cite for Viking Viking artifacts is in shadows.
Well,
Definitely.
there have been other guys who wrote about what they thought were Scandinavian influences in Western New York. Some of them make more sense than others. But really, one of the very best artifacts we've got is the Soda Space Spearhead in Lyons, New York. It's in a historical museum there.
Sodas Bay, right.
I'm told that there have been a couple of other finds a bit like it. Now, I've never been able to get any closer to it than that. I get exposed to a lot of undercurrents, I'm lucky enough to be one of the go-to people. Somebody gets a crazy something, they go, we better go tell Mace, So, and I like that because
They know a guy. You're that guy. Well, there's also the mainstream or whatever kind of offshoot, sort of mainstream, like of the Kensington Runestone, and then also the Newport Tower, because
yeah,
they
no,
don't
I'm aware
know
of
who,
this. Yeah,
there. Yeah, you mentioned that. That one's
they're
definitely in shadows.
yeah,
Um,
they're not as reliable.
I
They're
agree. I agree.
interesting, but let's stay with our course here.
Yeah. So my theory on that is,
I'll forget what I was about to say.
oh, go ahead. No, I don't want that. Thanks for the heads up.
Yeah.
Keep
Um,
ladling the gravy, Mason.
okay. Have you heard of the Lake Superior, the missing copper from Lake Superior?
Oh, indeed. Yes, I would love to get your take on that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's connected. See,
Okay.
somebody was mining huge quantities of copper. I mean, maybe 500,000,000 pounds of copper, took copper off of this one island in Lake Superior. And the dates of the mines are pretty much before the Viking period. There might have been like a 1,500-year span in which somebody was getting copper off of this island in Lake Superior and getting it out of there. Where did the copper go? Who was using it? We know the Native Americans in none of the continents used a ton of copper especially during that time period. They used it ornamentally. They didn't use it for tools or weapons much. But Europe at the time had a thriving bronze industry. And bronze is an alloy of cotton, I hope you'll edit that out, copper and tin. And Europe had tin, particularly Britain. On Wales, in the South Wales, there's this hill on the ocean they call Tintagel. They had huge copper mines there. And you don't need as much copper anyway. Tin. You had a lot of tin there. You don't need as much tin. But the proper amount of tin mixed with copper makes bronze, which is a hard metal, makes a pretty good weapon. So Barry Fell was wondering if maybe Germanic cultures from the same area of Denmark, Northern Germany, Scandinavia, Germanic people, just 1,000 years before the Vikings. That was kind of what Barry Fell thought. And he found some inscriptions in Canada, in Ontario province, Peterborough, I think that's where they were. And Barry interpreted a lot of these as being maybe Scandinavian, pre-runic symbols. So I think the long and short of what I was getting at is that I think there's probably a pretty good reason to think that there would have been a Scandinavian presence, or could have been. And we need to really get all the information together and really look it over. What we'd probably find is a genetic presence, DNA, among the Native Americans. There's a counterpoint to that, because the European diseases killed so many of the Native Americans that if you don't find something, it could have killed 90%. If there's a trace DNA in them somewhere and you haven't found it, between the percentage of people who died and the ones you haven't tested whose remains are left, that's no mystery. So I hope I'm making sense, but I think
Yeah.
there's a good case for some kind of, and the Scandinavians were some of the greatest seafarers of the ancient world. They
Right.
were great on the open ocean. And once you got into northern Canada and you got into the St. Lawrence River, you could take that all the way through Lake Ontario. All you had to do was get around Niagara Falls,
Boom.
which
That would have
meant,
been the lynch point. That's kind of where my theory jumps in, where there probably was some uh, either native tribes that probably held that as a clinch point because you're going to have to pay
yes,
taxes probably. But if you had a
post.
backdoor, so this is where my hypothesis is listening to some of these Norwegian historians that say, oh, there's no way that we were just at southern tip of Nova Scotia. We
Yeah,
were probably down in New York Harbor, most likely down to Florida, because that's the Viking essence of going further, right? To me, it doesn't make sense that they would stop at Nova Scotia, and they knew the rivers and for what they did in Europe, getting down all the way down to Constantinople. I propose that they were just like information at the academia level. It's bottlenecked. Holding that point of the Niagara Falls, just like you said, the front door is coming down the St. Lawrence into Frontenac, old Lake Frontenac, Ontario, but you would have to hit the wall of Niagara Falls. And if you held that, even if you had the portage around it, what if there was another way around up the Hudson? Not to say that the Erie Canal is an ancient waterway that was here, though I have proposed that before, but it's been shot
I
down.
guarantee it isn't.
Yeah, see, yeah, I worked my way to that, and like I said, I wasn't making any claims, but there was an old Lake Tonawanda. I'm sure you're familiar with. So,
Well, yeah, that was really old though. That was Ice
right,
Age.
that was Ice Age, like 10,000 years ago. Possibly were there other portages, um, cataracts or whatever, not cataracts, but waterways that the Vikings knew about to get around that. And if they did, they would have access to the interior, and it'd
Yeah,
be fur pelts
certainly
back and
possible.
forth
But
to Constantinople,
well,
maybe.
don't forget that the Scandinavians were great shipbuilders. It wouldn't have been a big problem for them to
Seaworthy.
have left a bunch of ships up by like Fort Niagara,
Let
and
me ask. Let me ask you this too. I was thinking about that because they were fantastic shipbuilders, seaworthy. I've shared a couple videos that demonstrate some Norwegian guys building it. They were looking at the grain to make sure that it would be sturdy, and they certainly were. And they were low draft, right? That's why they can
they are low draft. Yes,
get
the
deep
dragon
in,
ship.
right? As a
The
fisherman,
dragon
I know that, right?
was a marvel. The dragon ship was basically a big canoe.
Well, there you go. There goes the connection with the dragon thing, the dragon path, maybe. And the
Well,
Vikings did have the
the
Vikings did have dragon ships, so that's
yeah, the names are similar for sure.
right. And so they were seaworthy, and they were able to get in deep in the rivers. So
Well, yeah, and I mean, it would have been easy for them to, leave leave their ships at a point on Lake Ontario near the mouth of the Niagara River,
yeah.
march around it, rebuild their ships in Buffalo.
Oh yes, exactly. That's what I was going to say. I'm sorry, I forgot. They were able. They could have built them here and took them back as well. So that might be another thing to look for. Deciduous northeastern trees with
Loads of
maybe
trees.
that would be like a fingerprint if you could find them maybe in Constantinople. Because
Oh,
I'll guarantee, Mason. Here's where I'll throw something on the wall and see if it sticks. Like I guarantee there's some fur pelts in Constantinople that might be from the northeastern deciduous forests of America, and that might be indicative of a trading network, of the Vikings that had a lucrative access to the interior of the Northeast. The fur pelt trade was one of the most lucrative markets in the world at that time, right?
I
Around
don't know
those
about
times.
that. I knew it was in the 1700s.
Yeah, maybe later. Maybe that's a little bit too early
I think
to say that.
everybody had fur. And
They were definitely trading them, and they were known for getting the fur pelts. And I just wonder, where was the source? Was it now again, I'm not making claims, and that's a good check on you right there. The fur pelt trade was a little bit more lucrative, like with the East India and in the Pacific Northwest as well. Um,
Wait a
but
minute. Who needs fur coats in India?
well, Constantinople, I guess, and and
Sure.
that brings to mind the Varangian Guard and Harold
Right.
Hardrada, the alleged last
Yeah,
Viking. I
Harold
think
Hardass.
exactly. I think that he turned into a hard ass because he got a little bit. This is all conjecture, right? But
Yeah,
he was head of the Varangian Guard, and that's a time period that fascinates me.
he
And
was in it.
the Varangian Guard, it was the protectorate bodyguard of the Emperor of Constantinople, and they
Sure.
were the Northmen. So
Sure.
there definitely is a connection there. And again, that's why I preface with saying I'm just throwing it against the wall, not making any claims, but it's very interesting to think about that. And then to bring in and loop in what Barry Fell was talking about, he he was going back to the Phoenicians being here and Basques
Right.
possibly.
Right.
That
Um,
fascinates me as well. I mean, to round
well,
it all off.
yeah, Barry thought that there were more than one population here of unaccounted explorers. He thought the Phoenicians were here. Now they were great seafarers, and furthermore, the Phoenicians. There have been some Phoenician coins found in the Americas at various sites, and the protest against that is that what's to stop somebody in like 1845 getting a hold of a bunch of Phoenician coins and just dropping them somewhere. In other words, the fact that you find an artifact, it'll suggest something, but it doesn't prove it. On the other hand, I don't have a problem with the idea that the Phoenicians could have been here. As far as the Celts, Barry called them Celt Iberians. They were people from basically Spain who would have spoken a Celtic language. They had Celtic customs, Celtic religion. In other words, but see, the word Celt, it's not an ethnicity. It's sort of a language, a culture, a lifestyle. That's what Celt means. So if you were in Germany, or you'd have had blonde and blue-eyed Celts, Caesar reports running into them. If you were in England, you'd have had different colors, but you'd had blonde and blue-eyed people. But they'd have looked a lot like modern white Americans. If you were in Spain, you'd have had Celts that looked like Spanish people. So Barry Fell thought that the Celtic presence here was probably from Spain. And let me think. Now, Mystery Hill in New Hampshire, for instance, has been interpreted as a Celtic site. A lot of the New England states, particularly Vermont and New Hampshire, have these megalithic style sites that look a little bit like small tombs, like Newgrange in Ireland. It's like a chambered barrow. It's like you set up kind of a box of big stones, and then you cover it with dirt, and there's a space in the middle where people can get in and out. And there's a lot. The locals nicknamed them root cellars, but these were of great interest to Barry Fell. And he's not the only one. There is an outfit called the New England Antiquities Research Association. Their acronym is NERA. And they're very interesting people. They're very good minds, very good scholars, many of them. But they're just not mainstream. They're not academic. And their purpose is to sort of chronicle and preserve the likelihood, if not the possibility, that ancient explorers were in New England.
Huh. Sounds like I'll be following up
You should
with another
track some of that
contact.
stuff down. Oh yeah, they're fun. I mean, they're people like anyone else. Some of them are really fun, and some of them can be complicated. But in general, it's a neat organization, New England Antiquities Research Association. Now and then I join, and I'm a member that year, and then I let my membership lapse for some crazy reason. But I've given talks there. I've attended conferences. They're very interesting. I think you'd really enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm always following up on stuff and
You'd
getting
enjoy
getting
that. You should get up there. You'll meet some really cool people and get a bunch of ideas. They usually do 2 conferences a year. One's Halloween weekend, which takes me out, and the other one is usually in the spring.
Oh yeah,
And
because
they're
you're busy doing your
fun.
tours.
Well, yeah, no, I don't start my tours usually till the summer. I don't want to make a ghost walk business a 52 week a year business.
I see. Oh, I see.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, no, I think I could have done really well with them. Um, I think I could have been the Starbucks of ghost walks, but uh, I wouldn't have been writing books.
I got to get to one. I'll
I just
bring,
you've never been on one of my tours?
not yet. No, that's what initially I said.
Oh,
I'm ashamed to say that I haven't been.
oh, there's nothing to be ashamed
So I'm,
about. Get on out here this summer or fall. We'll have some fun.
I will for sure. So at very least, like what Barry's doing, Mystery Hill, he was on an In Search of show with Leonard Nimoy.
Sure.
And I showcased that one. It's kind of how um that's how I seen Barry Fell initially, is from that another YouTube channel had shared that, and I'm like, wow, this is very interesting. So if I just followed up. But if anything else, it's indicative of civilization on top of the native civilization that was here. I tend to think that there was. Now, when I do my own presentations and I refer to mainstream academia having a bottleneck, I'm not doing it as antagonistically, but I'm in doing my own research. I do see that certain information is hard to access, right? So that's why I
Oh,
like getting out there. But that
we
kind of rounds out to like what I was going to bring up about of the T word. Like I think what some call maybe mud flood, or I certainly want to get your opinion on Tartaria, and then we'll call that an episode. But older civilization, ruins that get have flora grow up over them and sedimentation. I think that's a lot of what people are saying is mud flood. Now, number one, I wonder if you've heard of these terms, looking into this alternative history research niche that
oh
I'm
yeah.
in. And what do you think about them? A quick summation, if you don't mind.
What do I think about who?
Well, Tartaria, and
Well, look,
the,
yeah,
the idea that there was an ancient a civilization not too far in the past that was realm wide, world global, giving away free energy, and they were building these stately type buildings all over similar areas. I know that I sent that the heads up thing to you, but
yeah,
it's kind of a very interesting and popular trope now in the YouTube.
it is.
But just curious your take on it. And
Yeah,
then
well, if I was to pick one of the multiple theories about developed ancient civilizations that are unaccounted for in our current texts, that wouldn't be the one I'd pick.
okay,
Honestly,
fair.
I think there's better evidence for a mound building culture like the Mississippian, Hopewell, Adena. There is evidence in New York State that somebody was over here making monuments out of stone and earth that the archaeologists don't have any accounting for. And I certainly believe that, for instance, in North America, there was more civilization, which is generally stereotyped as being cities, law codes, unified societies. I think there's real good evidence that there was some crazy stuff going on. Well, stuff that's unaccounted for going on in New York State. As far as in the Eurasian landmass, well, look at that temple complex in, I believe it's Turkey, Göbekli Tepe.
Yep, Göbekli Tepe.
That's really old. And they did not think humanity in like 10, 12,000 BC was organized enough to be able to construct large monuments. They didn't think we were advanced enough to be able to orient ancient structures to the constellations, the sun and the moon. Göbekli Tepe, or however it's properly pronounced,
I think that's it.
that pops a bubble right there. But how developed really was the society that made that? I mean, were they more developed than Europe was in the year 1000, or maybe even during the time of the Roman Empire? Are they more developed than that, or are they just surprisingly developed for that period in time? I would argue that probably they were like the megalith builders of Stonehenge. They were probably no farther advanced than that. They're just as advanced as they were 10,000 years earlier than we, or 5,000 years earlier than we thought.
Yep,
So we move our date line, but we don't change our paradigm.
tend to agree with that the more and more I look into it, because you start getting into this, like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with, real quick, you could round this out, like Graham Hancock, and the term that's flown around is ancient high technology. Now, Gobekli Tepe is very pivotal because it does draw back the um, civilization. They thought that we were still in hunter gatherer time period. Meanwhile, they can put together these type of things.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that there was
Had to have agriculture.
aliens, so to speak. I think that the
Oh, yeah.
craftsmanship and the ingenuity of man is drastically um, mis underestimated as far as at that time period. I don't think I don't necessarily tend to agree with certain time frames of human evolution and everything, but I
Yeah.
think that it's underestimated human ingenuity even at that time period. And even if Gobekli Tepe dates back civilization way before Stonehenge, they're saying that's like, well, towards the end of the younger Dryas, Gobekli Tepe,
Oh,
10,000 BC,
don't forget that
12,000 years ago.
that Gobekli Tepe pushes monument building back a few thousand
Way
years.
far, yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean that there were large cities, because Stonehenge, for instance, was not built by an urban culture. So as interesting as Gobekli Tepe is, and I can't wait for them to find more out about it, to me, it's not great evidence of an advanced prehistoric civilization.
Yeah.
Now, the concept that there could have been something like that had it may not have had the same technology. See, we are basically a percussion. Until recently, the power source of Western culture was percussion. It was gas and explosions, and then electricity and now we're sort of moving into other types of energy. But
Free energy.
there may be other kinds of energy sources out there that ancient people would have used. And they may have been able to do some wonderful things with genetics and crystals and anti-gravity and sound and all that. And these things wouldn't leave the same evidence as percussion technology. And maybe, I don't know, that's just kind of winging it here. I mean, you look at some of the monumental structures, for instance, in the Andes, among the Andean societies that predated the Inca. I mean, you look at this engineering, 100-ton stones, high up, perfectly fitted. I know the suits don't spend a lot of their brain power worrying about this, but I have yet to see anybody explain to me how this was done. I'm not positive it could be done now. And
There's some good leads in that sector of the research. Are you familiar with a term called geopolymer? Whereas not all of them, some of them might have been poured in place, these blocks, using dust of the actual earth itself, and not anything. There's a special aggregate glue that literally makes it more homogenized.
Yes.
I've heard lose the strata, but it's still almost like the rock, Mason. It's very
well. No, I've heard a rumor that they found things inside the stones that were used to build the Great Pyramid. That when one of them fragments, they'll find a piece of cloth or like human, just a piece of junk sticking out of it, and they go, "Well, wait, if this rock,
like it might have been poured."
Yeah, they thought they might have been molded.
To me, that makes more sense. Like critical thought or whatever. Again, I'm not right, you're not wrong, but the narrative of them dragging them, and then there's no strata though in these blocks. For example, the pyramid. So I just wonder. And then you start introducing this stuff about geopolymer. Yeah, we're not. Maybe they didn't necessarily have lasers and stuff like that. Just real simple tools, but high craftsmanship. Not everybody, to use this phrase, was a wage slave back in the day. And I think the more the average person was a little bit more astute and knew of the astrological symbols. And on average, even just 100 years ago, people out in public dressed more studious, and their writing was more. So there's a
Yeah,
regression of civilization in a certain sense,
we've
even though we're
fallen a
getting
long way.
even though we're getting this like free or whatever wireless energy. I think more people on average had a more better understanding of the nature of things, if that's a good
Well,
way to put it.
they didn't have the advantages of our general scientific and maybe mathematical, the results of our advanced research, but their minds were certainly more exposed to literature and what they knew of history, and their minds had a lot more facts and concepts in them. And I am worried about our world, especially in the United States, because people they're just we're very easily manipulated.
I agree. It seems like they were more in tune with the natural world of things.
Well, they
From
would have had to be. Um,
great point.
and that's to be admired. I mean, I'm not saying there's anything better or worse about them than I don't think humanity gains or loses virtue as time goes on, but I think we really need to reverse this brain slide because people who spend all their time texting and watching, it's no wonder hip hop is so popular, it's like Christ. It's about the only music you
How
could
dare you,
appreciate.
sir?
I don't mind it.
No, you're absolutely right. That's a good point, and that's kind of another one of the undertones of what I like to do, or at least promote, is to get out in the field. Right.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm relegated to be behind a keyboard to make these shows, but I have books. Fortunate to have books for my family. I'm also fortunate to be in this beautiful city, pretty much right smack dab in the middle from North Buffalo, where I'm at in Riverside, between Buffalo and Niagara Falls. I can get to the falls in like literally 15 minutes. So I promote that essence. I think to round this out and come wrapping this up, part of the message I put out there is get out from behind the keyboard. And it's cool to look at pictures online and sift through that. Yeah, that's all well and good, but just from the essence of what you said, get out and smell the air, smell the trees. I love doing that. It's a part of what I do. I feel compelled to share it as well.
Yeah.
So, and then books, go see your aunt that you haven't seen in a while, or your grandpa, or your cousins, and maybe they'll have some books for you to take off their hands, because that's how I got. Some of them were at my father's house. I had to coalesce all of them, and now I got a pretty decent library. So, and I'll be adding a couple more of your books onto it. On top of Shadows, I have the Haunted Ghost Walk tour book that you gave to me. I appreciate that.
Wait a minute. You mean the haunted places of Western New York?
Haunted Places of Western New York. Yep.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah, because I don't give away those Ghost Walk scripts. Those things are
you keep those.
gold
You emailed me the PDF copy.
of a book. I would
Yes.
not email you a script.
Thank
I trust you. I
No, the
trust
book.
you,
The
Justin,
book.
but
I
I
mean,
would
yes.
not. If I was going to give you a script, you would sign a release
I
form.
misspoke.
I'm not going to go into competition with Mason and Ghost Walks. Once I see this script, because those scripts,
You
the
got the
way I
market
write them,
cornered.
they are handbooks. I am very protective of those scripts.
I
Only
could
somebody
imagine.
who works in my company gets one of those. I was looking over a script today and just realizing how much work and effort it is to put together a script of a walking tour as developed as ours are in a kind of a shape that somebody else can read it like a book. It's and plus you all the hours you've put into acquiring the understanding, the background. It is, the idea that somebody would take one of your scripts and try to compete with you with it is it's shocking, but that's our world. So no, I wouldn't have sent you a script. Hey,
I misspoke.
why don't we? No worries. I've done it at least 20 times tonight, but why don't we do this another time?
Yeah, for sure. I was just going to wrap this up. That was another episode of Bushwhacking History, and that was my guest Mason Winfield. And if you don't mind, you let people know your website, where to find you, and the books that you don't got to go through all all of them again, but where they can
Uh,
find your books and your work for my viewers if they're
yeah.
interested in following up on your what you do.
Well, I have a website. It's masonwinfield.com. And it's under some pretty heavy reconstruction now, but I think you'd still be able to reach me through it. But my books are mentioned on there, and I've worked with, I think, maybe 5 publishers by now. So you're going to buy them different places, but I'm very happy with my 2 most recent books. They're both fiction. The most recent one, it came out in the fall. It's called A Ghost Hunter's Journal. It's about a pair of psychic detectives in Western New York. A white guy, a red guy, they get called into cases. Very happy with that book. It's based on some of my own research. The book that came out in 2021, I really like this one. It's called The Prince of the Air. It is the memoirs of a contemporary wizard. And he's not like Harry Potter. He's always joking about Harry Potter, but it's basically this guy dictating his memoirs, and he's a representative of a, not exactly a society, but a sort of a working network of people on the planet who just have abilities that the rest of us don't. And they're not as far-fetched as like Harry Potter, but it's quite an adventure. So both of these books, they're very different from each other. I'm very happy with both of them. The Prince of the Air and
Awesome.
A Ghost Hunter's Journal.
It does kind of sort of. I read the synopsis for it, and I'm going to be picking it up, and I'll give you feedback. I sort of thought it sounded a little bit like a mix between, forgive me, Harry Potter and like a Blade Runner type of deal esque. So I'm all over that.
Interesting.
I'm a
I would
movie
say
buff too.
good. It's certainly got adventurous elements from a lot of sources, but geez, what could I think of
That sounds interesting.
like it? I can't think really of a literary model for it. Um, I can for A Ghost Hunter's Journal.
That's the one that you sent me,
Yeah.
the
Ghost Hunter,
copy, not the script.
that there are a number of models, literary models for the psychic detective. One of my favorites is a book written by a woman, British occultist named Dion Fortune.
Okay.
And the book is called The Secrets of Dr. Taverner. And it's you should read that. It's really a cool little book. It's a lot more spiritual than it is horrifying,
Okay.
but yet that's a model of the psychic detective. There's another one I've read, Carnegie the Ghost Finder. I can't remember the author of that. William Hope Hodgson, maybe. Easy to find. Carnicki. I read a few of the, well, I've read all the ones I could find. I found them interesting, inspiring, but they weren't really models for me. I just enjoyed them. But anyway, it's truly been fun
Thank you,
sharing this
Mason.
time with you. And I don't think we got a tenth of the way through what we could have. So you want to have a chat sometime in the near future, don't hesitate to reach out, okay?
Yeah, I appreciate it. We'll save that for another time. And thanks everybody for listening. That was Mason Winfield, special guest. This was Bushwhacking History in Buffalo with Berserker Bear. Take care.